Hello everybody, it's your favorite West Virginia on Space here, and with the recent trailers coming out for Mortal Kombat 1 and its soon release date, it has really hyped up interest in the Mortal Kombat franchise. And as a weird parallel, the Marvel franchise has been steadily going down ever since, well, honestly, the end of Infinity War / Endgame really hurt the franchise. But it did get me thinking, however, of a random idea I think would be very cool. A bit weird, but I do think it makes sense. There's been rumors floating around this happening. What if they made a Marvel vs. Mortal Kombat fighting game, kind of in the vein of Mortal Kombat vs. DC, obviously. So, it's not totally original, but is it really impossible? Now, many people kind of think it's crazy because, well, they've already teamed up. Well, there's obviously Marvel vs. Capcom and the Injustice / Mortal Kombat games have their connection, so why would they make this thing? Well, simply put, money. It would be... Dude, can you just imagine the trailers, the hype that would get? Even if the game turned to be total nonsense, like, it was objectively bad, the people who would buy it just because it was a Mortal Kombat vs. Marvel game would be absurd. And there's no way that both sides of this wouldn't see the dollar signs this could make. And if it was really good, it might help, especially Marvel, because, well, to be quite frank with you, ever since Marvel vs. Capcom had their Infinity incident, the franchise is kind of dead there, and Marvel has been constantly trying to break into the fighting game genre even more. Stuff like Rise of the Imperfects and their, what about the Skrulls? I can't remember which name that had. But they've clearly been trying to do more stuff with the fighting game genre outside Marvel vs. Capcom, and it just hasn't panned out. But with the developers like NetherRealm Studios and the legacy of Mortal Kombat to help them, maybe they could actually pull it off. I mean, heck, they turned Injustice into a great fighting game series, and, so clearly they can do it. But let's get into more specific detail of what a specific Mortal Kombat vs. Marvel fighting game could look like. Let's begin. I'm going to go over gameplay first, and then we'll talk about the roster and the story mode, because, and trust me, we'll just get to all that, I promise you. But to start with gameplay, I would have it actually be a bit unorthodox in that it would be a 3D arena fighter. Now, they would still have health bars and all that jazz and the combo potential. It was not like a Smash Bros. Kind of game I'm suggesting here. Rather, it would be like a 3D arena fighter, so once again, the characters fight in a 3D arena, but they aren't locked to looking at each other like in, say, Soul Calibur or Tekken. This is for a few reasons, as I think it really does accommodate the kind of gameplay these characters work with. You could do, first of all, it allows movement and other abilities like that to be really cool, which are important for a lot of characters. And it lets you do cool stuff you can't do in other fighting games, like maybe throw cars or break through windows and fight in buildings, or other environmental effects that you just can't really do in a 2D arena, or one even like the Tekken where you kind of locked into a circular arena. This would obviously give it a lot to kind of play with and add to the distinction. And both franchises have experimented with this kind of style in similar ways. Marvel has, of course, outside of Marvel vs. Capcom, tried a few attempts at a 3D fighter, so they're clearly interested in the idea. Rise of the Imperfects has several elements that could be ripped off, probably, and Mortal Kombat has had the whole 3D era. And so both franchises have experimented with it, so there is some precedent to work with. But also, beyond being hype, it would help distinguish the game from the competitors. This isn't just Mortal Kombat vs. DC, but we switched out DC for Marvel. This is a totally distinct game with a distinct feel to it that you can just see by looking at it, which would help increase hype and popularity, or at least potential, beyond just we're going to have the Marvel and Mortal Kombat characters get into a fight. But ultimately, also because both franchises would benefit, Marvel could use it to help distinguish this game from Marvel vs. Capcom, so they didn't just feel like character swap, and like I mentioned previously for Mortal Kombat, they both have this benefit, so it feels more distinct than just, we switched out the characters from the last crossover. Speaking of the characters, another big thing is, of course, the roster. Which famous characters in both franchises are going to duke it out in a big crossover like this? Well, and this is the tricky part, both franchises have tons and tons of characters that could be cool and fun in this kind of game, but it's just not reasonable to say all of them, because your game just can't have that many distinctly playable characters in that faction, at least within reason. And if we look at the number of how many characters are released at launch in most fighting games in the past few generations, it's just not enough for some of the fictional lists I've seen where they give 40 characters in the base game before DLC. That's just not possible. Now, theoretically, it is possible, but it would lead to the characters not being distinct gameplay-wise, and you really do want that, because these characters might have some similarities, but you also want everyone to feel different, unique, and cool, rather than just being like, I don't know, 100 different colors of ninja. But, so with that in mind, I tried to find the average number of how many fighters were added in a fighting game, and use that as my basis for the number of how many characters I could pick for this game. So I will now go over my list, starting with the Mortal Kombat half of the roster. For Mortal Kombat, we have Raiden, Scorpion, Johnny Cage, Sonya Blade, Kung Lao, Reptile, Cyrax, Goro, and Noob Saibot. Admittedly, Noob Saibot could probably be switched around with some other characters if you want, but I would take him just because. And for the Marvel side, we have Iron Man, Spider-Man, Thor, Hawkeye, Magneto, Cyclops, Black Widow, Hulk, and Kraven. Now, admittedly, Kraven is also just, I really wanted one more bad guy on the Marvel side, but I couldn't, some were just hard to work into the story I have planned, so I didn't add them. And if you're curious, wait a minute, doesn't this roster kind of miss some big iconic characters from both franchises, and have some that are kind of more minor? Well, I'll get into that in the story section. As for the overall story, which is more of a plot outline I have, it goes something like this. Now, as a note, this does not take place in any pre-established version of the Marvel or Mortal Kombat universes. So this isn't like the 616 comics or the MCU or the old timeline of Mortal Kombat or the new timeline, the new era, nothing like that. This takes place in its own kind of amalgam of those universes where the characters can kind of be whatever the story needs them to be at that point. So, just take that as a note. But most notably, two things have happened in both timelines to kind of give us the feel we're going for. In this universe, Raiden has already gone down the Dark Raiden subplot, kind of, after probably defeat of Shao Kahn shenanigans after a few dozen times. And at this point, he is currently kind of ruling Earthrealm more or less with the Iron Fist to some varying degree, and is attacking or at least being highly aggressive to other realms in order to defend Earthrealm. Meanwhile, in the Marvel universe, a version of the Marvel Civil War happened, where basically Iron Man, also control of S.H.I.E.L.D., also has a huge amount of power on Earth, and is kind of also went down a similar lawful evil route as Raiden has. So basically they're both evil. The heroes under them either work for them, do some mission of brainwashing, mind control, blackmail, or just because though they don't always like what they're doing, they of course also understand that they would care most to defend their world versus others. Ultimately, this does lead to, like I said, the feel of the game. However, when portals or the universes start merging or other shenanigans like that, though I have the gateways between both universes meet, both of them, both Raiden and Iron Man, being both kind of evil and in the very similar headspace of attack and defend for their realm, they of course come into conflict with the other faction and try to take over the other one. And of course, you get tons of fights and stuff like that. However, in the background, there is a third faction kind of meddling with things. And this is where we meet some of the obvious characters that probably you thought should have been in the game. Specifically from Mortal Kombat, we have Liu Kang, Katana, Sub-Zero, and Fusion. And from Marvel, we have Captain America, Doctor Strange, Rogue, and Wolverine, who these heroes from both universes just oppose their version of the evil dictator, trying to do the right thing and fight back against evil no matter the cost. These heroes have met each other and are trying to find a way to stop it. This is where the story could kind of do a few different things. One is that you could simply have what I like to call a branching story path, where depending on who wins what fight, or what character you pick, it can affect the story into several different outcomes. Or you could just do something slightly more generic, where you basically pick which faction at the start of a game, and then you play through their version of the events where they win the game. I would also have it be that you can't unlock the third faction, like I said, the one I have colored in purple, until you've beaten one with the other two, because they're kind of like another faction going on here. And ultimately, you can kind of do either one. I kind of like the second option more for conciseness, but it really doesn't matter which one you want to do. But ultimately, this is how I kind of do the story. And you can kind of get some of the plot beats in there. Like, if you play the Iron Man story, the final boss is Raiden as you playing as Iron Man. Also, as a note, I would ditch the Netherrealm's, chapter system. Characters fight whenever it makes the most sense, just because this would be too hard to try to work everything out, and other YouTubers point out the flaws of that system. Ultimately, there are just some other details and other things like that, but they aren't really worth mentioning. Ultimately, I think this game could actually be really cool, as it would, of course, two franchises that kind of make sense to have their fight, have storylines that could merge in that kind of way, and ultimately I think would be a very interesting, fun game, and with great potential. Ultimately, though, that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you think there's potential in a Mortal Kombat versus Marvel fighting game, or is it all just random fanboy wish fulfillment? Anyway, write down in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.